IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. Fake news has become an endemic problem all over the world. With the advent of social media and sharing platforms, fake news travels in seconds and often ends up hitting the target much before the real news even begins to go out. Refuting or exposing every bit of fake news is a futile task because the damage is done. People seem to be more inclined to believe that fake news, anything that conforms to their well-set beliefs. So far, authors have not engaged with the issue in any kind of major way, but a writer who's also a journalist reacts much faster. And Amitabha Kumar is just such a person. Teacher, journalist, and author Kumar has come out with a new novel, A Time Outside This Time, which grapples with fake news and the harm it can do. Of course, the novel is far more complex than just that. It talks about Hindutva, it talks about a little bit about identity, and a lot about the narrators, whose name is Satya, his own personal story. Kumar teaches at Vassar, a small but exclusive liberal arts college in Poughkeepsie, New York, and has written for very prestigious newspapers and magazines. And he has also written 11 books. I wonder how he finds the time. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Amitabha Kumar.
Thank you, boss. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so straight up front, you're a man of many parts, but these parts seem to fit together very neatly. Does the journalist spill into the writer, and do they both flow into your teaching? How does it work?
Yes, I think what happens is that journalism, as a tool for students, is important because it allows them to think about the world outside the classroom, and that they must discover the world outside the classroom. And so I myself, having come from India and felt the alienation of, or the distance from my own motherland, I have always thought of journalism, of going back and doing stories, investigating stories as a way of connecting with that world that I had left and become distant from. So that's the part of the journalism. Journalism, often clothed in a false idea of objectivity, is sometimes limiting, and there the writer comes in, because the writer can be unabashed, shameless about investing personal interests or even interrogating what is the role of the personal. And so the writer and the journalist together in tandem, for me, work as a good tool of writing, so that the writing is never under the false illusion that it is objective. Rather, it is always examining the past, the backgrounds, the interests from which this writing flows. And I try to teach both these aspects in my classes. I'll have a course, for example, called These American Lives. So that is about journalism, where people have to go and interview people and write a report that is narrative. And I also, at the same time, teach fiction and non-fiction, where the personal voice and the interrogation of the personal voice is also important. So all of that is really a package. Of course, it has taken a lot of time to find this kind of mix and to feel comfortable with it. But, these gray hairs have been earned with some labor, and I'm happy where I am and where my students are.
So very well put. As we say in these parts, they have not become white after just getting in the sun. So even your books have a symbiotic connection with each other. Some subjects show up in different places. Immigrants is a major preoccupation with you, and shows up in your work, and your boyhood in Patna, where you grew up. In this latest work too, both are very much present. How is that kind of deliberate, or do you want to continue exploring those subjects?
Yes, it is very deliberate act. I sometimes think, maybe because I started my career as someone who wanted to be a reporter, And I always wanted to, even when I was in graduate school here, boss, I wanted to go back. In fact, your colleague Siddharth Varadarajan will remember how I used to go and visit him in his offices. Especially later, I remember in Times of India, when I would bring my report and say, boss, can you publish this? So what I'm saying is, my interest in a reportorial voice has meant that I try to, even when I'm inventing, I try to pitch my imaginative accounts very close to what my own past is. So as if it is indeed my own autobiography. In other words, the reportorial voice remains very close and personal, and I continue to investigate what has been, well, let's put it this way. I always continue to investigate what is adjacent to my own past. So immigration is indeed important because I came to the US from India when I was a graduate student, and my Patna and my boyhood there and Bihar in general are fertile grounds for me to talk about. मुझे लगता है कि this distance, trying to do entirely imaginative fantasies is a wrong way to go. And I don't have not only much faith, I don't have much respect for the kind of historical fiction that people spin out about, and that is rich in mythologies, etc. I think those are rather cheap ways of avoiding the real and the pressure of the real and the urgency of the moment. I would rather do this other work which responds to what is pressing on us. For example, lynching on Indian streets, stuff like that.
But isn't that kind of limiting, because a novelist does engage with issues of the past and not the immediate? Journalism perhaps cannot afford nostalgia beyond a point, but novelists will write about. Otherwise, no one would write a fantasy or a book about 2 centuries ago or something like that.
Say. I understand that. I mean, of course it is limiting, but where are there no limits? What I'm trying to say is these limits are important to me. Those other folks who, let's say, write about 200 years ago, have their own limits. Once you wrote a piece, maybe it was in The Wire, I can't remember now. It was about the 70s. It was a report on what that decade had meant. Or it was maybe just of 1 year in the 70s. But I took notes on that because I'm interested, of course, in memory. And by saying that I'm interested in the present doesn't mean that I am blind to ideas of how this present came to be. And I think no one should be like that. It's just that I'm searching at the moment, and you can call it limits, but I would think that is more the pressure on the work. I'm searching for a way to respond to the present. I'll tell you a story. I mean, it's very good that you and I are having this conversation because you are a top man at The Wire. And this whole book that we are talking about actually began as a piece, a small piece that was published in The Wire. Trump was about to be elected. Fake news had already entered our discourse. I'm talking now about 2016. I was coming back from a college where I had given a reading, and I thought the first anniversary of Muhammad Akhlaq's lynching in Dadri was coming up. And I wrote a line. It said something like, "A lot of life is left in a man being killed." And then more lines came. I stopped my car on the side and I wrote a piece. And then I sent it to you guys, and you guys published it a few days later. I'm telling you all this because I want you to know that I was struggling with the idea that what can a writer do? What can we write that responds imaginatively to what is happening around us? And by imaginatively, even in that short piece, I was trying to imagine what are the thoughts of a dying man. I was trying to end so that someone whose life had been stolen away so brutally, how could we return in our memories? How could we return some dignity and some humanity to that person who had been so quickly killed.
You mentioned fake news, Amitabh, in 2016, and you're right, because in a prehistoric era, which is anything before 214,
Yes.
we used to talk about rumors, and there were some groups which are expert in rumors. So, for example, I'll give you, and these rumors used to be touted as fact. So, for example, there used to be this crackpot historian called P.N. Oak, who used to say that the Taj was actually a Hindu Shiva temple. Now, I've heard this since I was a boy, and we knew some people who belonged to the RSS, and they used to talk about it, etc. And they used to always say, we all know that Nehru's family is actually Muslim. Now, these were stray kind of things that came to our ears. Now, cut to 2016 onwards, and you are looking at the same things escalated 2 million times, where 50 people may have heard that. Today, it reaches 500 million potentially. So the extent of this has become huge and a real, I would say, disease. So you've been quick off the mark in writing a book about it. What was the trigger that prompted you to do that? You mentioned Trump's election, but was there something else?
Yes, in my case, the idea of fake news as a term really came to me because of Trump's use of that, basically to denounce any journalism that was critical of him. But where it pierced my skin, where it touched me really, was the discovery through repeated news accounts that fake news spread through WhatsApp in India was leading to lynchings and killings. The police would send out warnings in India that this is a rumor that is being spread about kidnappers. But that didn't prevent people quickly from spreading news on WhatsApp, and then 2 or 3 unfortunates would be brutally killed. I thought this was both fascinating and utterly devastating. How people succumb to lies and then act with such fierce violence to erase people's lives. It has been one of the most depressing things that I have watched, these videos where suddenly you see someone being killed. And I was thinking that as writers, we have to respond, and was wondering how to do it. And that's how I started thinking about this novel. Because, as your listeners must know, India is the largest producer of fake news on WhatsApp, because the largest amount of users of WhatsApp and are in India. And so it was a very pointed response on my part. How can an older medium like the novel respond to this new medium, this new technological medium called WhatsApp, and its use for such an insidious purpose? And that was the challenge. Also, remember, if I'm writing fiction, the challenge I'm facing aesthetically is, how is my fiction going to oppose the fiction of the one spreading fake news? What is the difference between their fiction and my fiction? These were all, I guess, also aesthetic questions for me, and also, of course, political questions. And those were the ones I was trying to work out by writing this book.
Your book is much more, isn't it? I mean, it's a memory of your own past, your own life. The writer is a professor at a small liberal arts college in America, and he's on a retreat. He's written a novel which is exactly the same novel as yours, about the immigrant carrying a bomb, a foreigner carrying a bomb. Am I right? Sorry.
Ji. Yeah, a foreigner carrying the crook of his arm, a tiny bomb. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So there is a writer, Satya, present in the book. And Satya and you are quite congruent. So also the past in Patna and all that. So is it really speaking your story?
Uh, no, there is you're very right. First of all, you're very kind to say it is much more. Because and that is where your first question also returns to us, which is that of what is it that mixing writing and journalism does? So it expands the canvas, writing does. Because it is fiction, the canvas can be broader. It can also be more intimate. It can be personal. Is it my story? Well, the way I have tried to explain it to people is by saying that there's a friend of mine who's here from London called Jeff Dyer, and he had a great quote once. He said, "I write within an inch from life, but all the art is in that inch." So what I'm trying to say is that it is my story and it isn't my story. There is a lot of invention on every page, and yet on every page, there is a lot of me in it.
In fact, interesting you should mention Jeff Dyer because he's Jeff in Menace, Death in
Varanasi, yes.
is a favorite novel. And I'm sure that's also slightly part autobiographical.
Say. Yes.
And he's somebody who was in Bombay, and unfortunately, our meeting didn't work out. But that apart, we are also pretty preoccupied with fake news because we are often the targets, not as much as many others. But I've kind of identified generally that the kind of fakes there are, subtle distortion of the facts, which makes them somehow more plausible. Some are completely made up. I find a lot of glorification of India, which is factually completely inaccurate. Every third or fourth person in NASA happens to be an Indian. Indians invented this, that, and the other. Or stories about the Nehru-Gandhi family, which are laughably fake. So there are many more. How would you categorize or how would you qualify what fake news is?
Yes. Well, that question
because to conclude, your fake news, my fake news may be your fact.
Yes. That is the tragedy, boss. That is the tragedy. But to answer the first part of your question, there are some kinds of fake news that when you read, you immediately know that, of course, this is not true because there is an amount of ridiculousness in it. But there is so much else that you want to believe or are less suspicious about because it accords with your own predilections, your own prejudices. And I'm sure, I don't know about you, but I'm sure I have forwarded some post which was actually false, but simply because it seemed to ring true. Now, your last remark is the one that is really critical because you understand that you might believe something is a fact, but for the other person, that is entirely fake news. And so we are come to a crossroads where facts take you in a direction that is entirely different from belief. Someone has faith, they believe in the great leader, and you know that what is being stated by them is false, but they will not change their minds. So it is a crisis of democracy, frankly, because if 150 million people really believe in what is wrong, let's say about the great leader, and they vote still for him, then the nation faces an acute crisis because false news believed blindly has led us to a place where a thug gets to be, and a liar and a propagandist gets to rule us again for another 5 years or 4 years or 3 years, whatever it is. So, it's a problem. I don't know, the work that organizations like yours do is that of trying to inform the public bringing what is fact checked into the public arena. But don't you struggle with the idea that how do I reach more people? More importantly, how do I convince more people? Because isn't that the critical question? So I don't know. You tell me.
No, of course, there are various ways to approach it, and I frankly do not have a in-code solution. And sometimes I think, in as you as a literary man and a professor would appreciate this, that in a postmodern world, uh, you've got to go by Pomo theory, which says all opinions are of equal value. Then we are a democracy after all, so why not let everyone say whatever? So really speaking, this is going to become finally find its own equilibrium or something like that.
Mm.
So my one opinion is that that many of these things merely reinforce what people already believe in. So is it really that much of an issue because it reaches to the converted, preaches to the converted, and the non-believers are never going to believe it anyway. So,
yes,
yes, I'm sorry to throw in that literary theory, cultural theory reference, but that was just my small bit. Anyway, please go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's a despairing outlook when we know that it is sometimes, even if you were to refine your version of the truth or your story of the truth, it will only reach those who already want to believe what you believe instead of reaching someone else. My own hope is that fiction, or for that matter, film or television, can somehow, because of the power of the story, reach sometimes even those people who do not necessarily believe what you believe. Because fiction, novels come with stories of people. What is more important is characters rather than their beliefs. And therefore a reader can enter imaginatively into the life, or at least that's my hope, that can happen. One thing I find useful is, and this has something to do with what you were earlier saying about literary theory, etc., is sometimes the idea often that exists, that people propose, is that instead of fighting truth with truth, what you can introduce is a certain kind of play. Now, the idea of what the postmodernists would call a ludic consciousness or play, but in what layman's terms we could call comedy or satire. So I like the fact that the Jon Stewart's The Tonight Show would take a few of Donald Trump's tweets and then put them in a gilded golden frame and set it up as a museum and have a art criticism commentary on each of those. And I found this kind of satire to be much more liberating and also enjoyable for the reader than simply saying, simply countering his falsity with his alleged falsity with a more strident truth. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to say that art or satire or comedy has a different way of prizing the fixed opposition of truth and falsity by leading you into this other area. And I think that's where art comes, because we can try to, instead of simply contesting the truth, we can critique the truth by posing another reality or being satirical about it or by making people laugh. And in that case, let's recognize, what has been useful about the rise of comedy on the Indian scene. There have been at least 3 or 4 figures who have emerged in a way that is, I keep getting videos of them sent to me all the time, of how they take on power. And they take on power by also making us laugh at power.
In fact, Amitabh, you may be on to something because those figures, of course, have got a high profile. But, a young girl has taken advantage of YouTube and started singing about UP.
UP में Kaaba. Hey, you Kaaba. Yes, yes.
I noticed today
Ji.
that I have heard her, but I noticed today that the original by Ravi Kishan praising Yogi Adityanath has 600,000 views on Twitter. And she's got, for this video, 1.9 million.
Bataiye.
So a lot of organic stuff is coming from the ground. People who don't have contacts or profile or are not among the PLUs and yet are creating this content independently, maybe at a slight risk and a lot of risk to themselves.
Yes.
But
one is to admire the bravery. I mean, this person is, I think her name is Neha Singh Rathore. And
yes.
You have to admire the pure audacity of that of that creation, and also how authentic it is. It is tied to a mode of speaking and a mode of questioning. I liked it. I thought it was wonderful.
So I found it interesting that one of the characters in the book, Farooq, who's pressured to report on his fellow Muslims by the law and order agencies, turns out himself to be inventing his story in some ways. So in a sense, fakery can cut several ways, or am I seeing too much?
No. You're saying absolutely correctly, because I feel that we should not speak from a place of purity. I felt in my portrayal of this character, who is in many ways based on someone I myself had met and interviewed, I felt that there should be a distinction between someone lying about his credit card statement, let's say, and you, as the massive US surveillance state, charging him with terrorism. Because what happened was, especially when I was writing my book, A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, I found Indian and Pakistanis, many of them Muslim, some of them Sikhs, arrested for small frauds and then being turned into informants. It was as if the global terror state found a new army of recruits, really. It was quite a discovery for me, because I would go to these trials in New York or New Jersey, and there would be Indians who would be in the defense, there'd be Indians who would serve as witnesses for the prosecution, and there would be Indians who would be translators, there'd be Indians who were interpreters. It was an amazing, I felt as if in our immigrant saga, our Desis had now found a new employment opportunity at much cost to themselves. आप समझ रहे हैं ना? This is where your question comes in is that here were some people who had indeed committed all kinds of fraud, but these were small frauds, but holding on them the threat that they would be deported under terrorism rules, they all became informants, and they did immense harm, because they would be forced to recruit other people and do other things, and people were stupid. They would be drawn into these little conspiracies, and that is how entrapment worked. And my whole book there was about that portrayal. In the context of presenting that book, I met this other person, and whom I've fictionalized into the Farooq character, who indeed was inventing his stories to some extent about his greatness, also about his personal life. But that didn't mean that he was a terrorist. But that is the threat under which the US recruited him then to work as an informant and to go and work as a translator when they were torturing prisoners out there in northwestern Pakistan. So there are truths, and then there are greater truths. There are lies, but then there are greater lies. And we must, as critical citizens, be able to distinguish between them rather than succumb to an homogeneous account of all these things that the state perpetrates.
We'll be right back after this short break.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into A Show About Crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. So these are sad stories about people in America where they land up, and so as a journalist, you come across them. You don't have to invent reasons for researching them, and there's must be so much more lying about there for you.
Yeah, it is, boss. But journalism is what? Journalism is a passport. You use the passport to present it to someone, and then that person says, "Come into my country called my life." Okay? So it is indeed true that as a journalist, I am able to enter people's homes and people's lives. लेकिन मुझे तो ये भी लगता है बॉस कि by leaving Patna, leaving Bihar, leaving India, I have lost a whole field of stories. That my real stories lie there. That's I want to tell you that too. I feel as if that I do have access to some stories here, but these stories are important to tell, but these stories do not command as much of my own attention and passion as stories in India do. I just want to note that too. I don't think it's entirely about nostalgia. It's about language. It's about belonging. It's about trying to figure out what is near to you, wanting to change things in a way. As an outsider here, I do not want to necessarily, I don't think I even can participate in that conversation about change. But in India, I feel like, I know if I went to Bastar, for example, and spoke to people, and then I think, okay, I'll write a story and I report on it. I wrote up for the New Yorker, for example, about Chhattisgarh, and I thought later that, I grew up for a part of my childhood in Jharkhand. If I was spending more time in, let's say, like Ranchi, I would write a much better story than I did simply through a short visit. So that's also there. I'm just putting it out there. I would have loved to work for The Wire for years on end and produce better stories.
I'm afraid you won't be able to make a living. But is it the yearning of the diaspora?
It is, I think, except that I'm also, boss, very skeptical of such yearning. In fact, in one of my early books, Bombay, London, New York, I wrote that, the soft emotion of nostalgia in the diaspora is often turned into the hard emotion of fundamentalism. All those people, all those NRIs who sent gold bricks back to India in the campaign that led to the demolition of the Babri Masjid and the building of the Ram Temple. I remember that. I was a young graduate student at that time, and I felt that these people who felt distant from home and were nostalgic and were yearning for home had turned that fairly innocent yearning into something far more dangerous and nefarious. And so even as I'm sharing my own nostalgia with you, or my own yearning with you, or my own faith that there would be better stories in India, I'm also saying to you that I'm very skeptical or suspicious of this impulse because I have seen the results it led to.
No, I can't imagine you sending gold bricks. But
my fellow NRIs did, and when I married a Pakistani and wrote about it in the Hindu, and this happened, the Kargil war was going on. And of course, India and Pakistan were also playing a cricket match in the World Cup at that time. So I saw someone in Manchester during India-Pakistan, was it the semi-final? I cannot remember now. In that match, wearing a sign that said "Cricket for Peace." So that night, after my own wedding, I also wrote a piece, which was published in the Hindu the next day. It was called it was called Marriage for Peace. And Kargil war was going on. And a right-wing group, Hindu group, an offshoot of the Bajrang Dal in New York, put me on what they called a hit list. So what I'm trying to say to you is that there are a large section of NRIs that are even more nationalist than the nationalists in India. And that produces in them a certain zeal that is murderous, or certainly, I don't know, full of hate.
Yeah, it's many things. One day you and I will sit face to face, I hope, and discuss NRIs. I've been NRI of sorts for a few years.
Yes.
The thing I missed the most was historical context. You talked about Bastar or something like that. Go to somewhere, and there is a depth of understanding already present in your DNA, which you don't have to invoke, and you don't have to draw. It's lying there, and you draw upon it. When you go to Tamil Nadu, it doesn't seem like a foreign country to you. So we'll have that discussion some other day. So I'm going to now ask you a professional secret. With all your daily work of teaching, assignments, family man, how do you find time to write books?
It's a good question. I wasted all my youth and all those wasted years in Delhi University, and then later when I was a graduate student. That pressure of all those wasted years has always weighed on me. I felt like, boss, I have to make good of that time. So part of it is guilt. How do I write? The real secret, boss, was the discovery that I should write every day, 150 words every day, and that I should walk mindfully for 10 minutes. So those two things, just that discipline, has allowed me to be a little bit productive. I have even added the idea of, while I'm in London, I'm doing a drawing every day. So, because I have a book coming out of drawing soon from HarperCollins India called Blue Book. तो मैंने सोचा कि अब उसके as a sequel I'll do a yellow book. तो मैं यहाँ पर रोज drawings भी कर रहा हूँ. So just by having a small modest goal and by following it every day, धीरे धीरे it becomes a book. So वही कर रहा हूँ. That is my secret, and you should adopt it too.
Yeah, well,
you have a book in you, first of all, about cinema. It is just waiting to come out.
I have written books about cinema.
Oh, yes. Now I recall, yes.
I have many books jostling with each other. But again, that's something I'm finding increasingly difficult. But also about your artwork, what little I've seen, when you hold an exhibition, let me know. I'll come and pick up a few things.
Thank you, sir. It will be an honor.
Because I'd love to have one or two things on my walls.
Say.
This is your cue to say, "Arey, don't pick up. Let me gift you."
But I thought if I make it as a public declaration, other people will make demands. But I was secretly going to do that for you.
Anyway, that's just a joke. You've got another book, that Blue Book, coming us. Just quickly tell us what it's about.
What happened is that during the pandemic, my children were at home also. So I said to them that they should draw every day and maybe write every day. So my son, for example, would write a paragraph. So by drawing, I thought it would, as a daily practice, it would be an outlet for something. And in my case, I started then painting on the obituaries of the COVID dead printed by the New York Times. Just as a way, once again, of continuing my way of thinking about lives and lives lost. So it became a sort of a document of the pandemic. And then when we had outdoor classes in the tents instead of the classroom, my office hours would be next to a lake on my campus. तो मैं वहां पर भी ड्राइंग्स करने लगा. So it was just became a record through drawings and through journal entries of how a writer can respond to a changing world and to a world in crisis. So it's a diary. It's a diary of living through the pandemic and trying to think about how writing or drawing can save you or at least preserve your sanity for a little while.
Lovely thought on that. Absolutely, how should I call it without sounding cliches, on that evocative note, which is a good outlet for drawing and writing, a good outlet for the day's pressures. We end this conversation with Amitabha Kumar, teacher, journalist, novelist, artist, and I would say a flaneur of some sort, an international flaneur. So he was talking about his latest novel, A Time Outside This Time, which is about fake news, with ruminations about fundamentalism, Trump's America, and immigration and immigrants, naturally. We'll be back again next week for another edition of the Wire Talks. Thank you very much, Amitabha Kumar, for talking to us. And
it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for your work.
And we'll be back again next week with another guest on the Wire Talks. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye. Bye. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus talks to renowned film critic, author, and journalist Anupama Chopra about her new book, A Place in My Heart. On Shunyavan, Shiliditya and myself are joined by co-founder of Blue Tokai, Matt Chandranjan. We discuss the origin story of Blue Tokai. The Simplified host talked to Dr. Nitin Arora about COVID and its impact on the medical fraternity. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth explores what it means to be inclusive and politically correct in today's day and age. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav visits Kushinagar, the sacred place believed to be where the Buddha attained Mahaparinirvana. Also, just one quick announcement for everybody. Would like you to check out the new version of our Android app. It's available on the Play Store. It's a really interesting take on how to listen to podcasts. Do give it a look and let us know what you think. We're open to feedback on all of our social media channels. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also, do remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth really does help. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. And we have a number of channels there at ivmpodcast.com/YouTube where you can take a look at them. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Habits? Routines? How exactly do they help us get better? Well, to simplify it for you, tune in to the Habit Coach podcast. I am Ashton Doctor, and I'm going to be here to help you get better daily with some simple, easy to do habits that you can easily adapt to your life. So tune in to the Habit Coach podcast from Monday to Friday, because I believe that awesome lives start with awesome habits.